Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The More You Know. Today, we're talking with Ken Facey, leader in diversity and inclusion at the Walt Disney Company and former ambassador to Walt Disney World.
Ken is going to be talking to us about the importance of education to further inclusion, as well as walking a mile in someone's shoes and just learning their story.
We've got a lot of great stuff, so stick around. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me both. I always love discussions and, talking about these different communities that truly impact, Central Florida and beyond. But, I'm Ken Facey, originally from Brooklyn and moved to Brooklyn, New York, moved to Rahway, New Jersey, and, truly always had a passion for being involved in storytelling and experiences and whatnot. And that led me into a career of Disney. And when you put on that Disney name tag for the first time and you interact with people from all over the world, you start to kind of see how they are experiencing the magic as well. And you can't help but to be curious about how they experience it. And this includes, people with different backgrounds, different diversity and different ethnicities, abilities, disabilities. So with that, you just become curious. And what's been really fascinating for me is through my almost 14-year career here, I have been able to interact with different guests from all around the world and different casts that represent that same aspect I talked about before. And it's really gotten me into a career path where I shape learning experiences and topics to educate people on those different backgrounds, so we're that much more prepared for the next generation of Disney guests. But not only that, but just the next generation holistically. So besides that, because work takes up a lot of your life. I'm a musician, and I like to write on the side as well.
You mentioned your childhood in Brooklyn. Tell us a little bit about what the Facey family was like growing up in Brooklyn.
Yeah. So in full transparency, I have a older brother, and it was my mom at first, and my of course my mom and my dad. But due to sometimes the way the world sees people, uh, one evening in Brooklyn where my dad was looked at as a threat in coming home because he was this tall black man, he was killed in this struggle with him. So that's when I first learned about death very early. So it was my mother. It was just my mom, but my grandmother came over from Africa uh, to kind of help out. So I was raised in a house with my grandmother and my mother and my brother. And due to the it wasn't necessarily safe outside, so we always had to be inside, like secluded into our apartment. And I just remember watching this television special, Walt Disney World's 15th birthday celebration, over and over and over and over again until finally, and the Muppets at Walt Disney World was also my second favorite. It was a great special. But finally, was able to move out of the neighborhood and go into New Jersey, and where it was a little bit better. I could go outside, like ride a bike and go play out with friends and things like that. And learn saxophone and get involved in sports. But in Brooklyn, it was not a very pleasant place. I as a child, you had to learn very quickly about what was going on. And on top of it, I was just talking to my mom about this the other day. I think where it's almost a blessing is my grandmother's hard of hearing. So my cousins grew up knowing that she could speak and hear, but when I was born, she went completely deaf. So her having this thick African dialect, and trying to speak, no one could really understand her. So I would have to go and interpret for her through sometimes sign language or reading lips. So when there'd be times my grandmother, one of the strongest women I know, who's having like a heart attack, would pick me up from school to take me to the hospital so I could tell people that she was having a heart attack. And I was only 7 years old. and she would walk to a school, then walk to a hospital to be like, this is what's going on, and find out she had a heart. So I almost quickly had to learn that there's society, and then there is how do you skate society and look at it differently. And I did that through my grandmother's eyes.
Yeah, you did a lot of growing up very fast. That's an incredible story.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Had no other choice in a way, but it's like, what do you do with it? You could mope around your whole life, or you could stand up and keep walking. And I learned that my mother had to keep walking for her two boys. Eventually we got a little brother, but she had to really provide really quickly for me and my older brother. So I got to learn through their eyes really quickly. I guess my mother always told me, you got to give people the benefit of the doubt, and you just never know anyone's story until, you really get to know someone. And, so I told you that, my dad, essentially, we lost him due to racism. And you would think that I would grow up having this stigmatism against certain people, but I don't, because that was just one person. That's not an entire race of people, that there are good people out there. So I try to be as welcoming and as open as I possibly can, to hopefully, inspire someone to do the same thing.
You speak a lot about inclusion and diversity when it comes to your Disney career. Have you found that your job has also influenced your life? Like, did it go both ways?
Yeah, my job has definitely influenced my life, big time, because at the Walt Disney Company, where, so I'll backtrack. I had the honor of spending time with Disney legend Marty Sklar, who knew Walt. And I'll never forget, he always called me and my counterpart, who was in a role, Brandon, the boys. Anytime he came on a property, the boys, let the boys pick us up. So I remember him one day, asking them, and he was in my car, and we were just I forget I think we were going to Target for a battery or something. I have no idea. And Marty Sklar is in my car. This is so crazy to me. So anyways, we're driving back, and he's like, Ken, and we're by the Target off of like 192 by Animal Kingdom, and I'll never forget. So I'm pointing. I'm like, Marty, that's how close Animal Kingdom is. He's like, Ken, well, do you know what a Disney park is all about? Like the essence of a Disney park? I'm like, oh yeah. He's like, then what is it? I was just like, the essence is it's fantasy, it's escapism, it's memories. And he was like, try again. And I was like, oh, I was just like, happiness, creating happy memories. He's like, no. I was like, all right, then what is the essence of a Disney park? And he said, it's all about reassurance. When you go into a Disney park, everyone treats you with kindness, politeness, the environment is clean. You literally see someone picking up a piece of trash and throwing it away. He's like, imagine if the guests walked out of the park and was inspired to do just that from the cast. He's like, Disney Park is all about reassurance. And I'll never forget that. So like when I go and travel places, now I think about my experiences at Disney in a way that that hopefully somebody could see someone else positive in society, that they're reassured that there's still good people out in the world.
How do you approach a situation like stereotypes and things like that, that people embrace these stereotypes and blame an entire race of people when it's really just one? How do you put a cap on that?
Yeah, I think you have to educate. You have to educate, and you have to come with it from an open mind, because sometimes when we look at society, and yes, it's one person, but that one person can influence other people around them, right? And if no one really understands why this all happens, and what the intent of it was, and the positive and negative impacts of all this, then that narrative that you just mentioned, it will never change. So we have to educate and be so open to understand, in a way that it literally, one person changed the way of life for someone, or affected someone negatively, and this is the outcome. So just put yourself in their shoes. Joe Gardner says in Soul, when 22 is just like, I can't believe she wants, or 22 wants to live. And Joe is like, well, I let 22 walk a mile in my shoes. And I think sometimes that's exactly what you have to do to kind of educate that in a way, and show that this stuff just doesn't happen overnight. There's this long history of it. So you really have to go and do your homework and raise awareness in a way. So hopefully you'll start to shift that one person's thinking, or everyone else who's involved thinking.
Tell us a little bit about your brother and how your relationship with him and how your family relates to him.
Yeah. So I have two brothers. My older brother Greg, we're 2 years apart. So grew up with him for still growing up, I guess. And really just my best friend. Like we have. He doesn't admit it, but we always love storytelling, and we bonded over so much of Disney and going to theme parks growing up. And another thing that like I love on the side is professional wrestling, WWE. So both of us love that, but we love it for the story, right? Because all it is, it's this story, and we love that. And then Darren, who came into our lives, he was born in 2004. That's another just great story. He was just growing up and it wasn't really speaking, and then my mom took him to get like tested for like speech impairment and things like that, and we learned that he was autistic. So he has taught us a lot as we're teaching him, and that has been just this incredible journey of learning what autism is, and not looking at it as a diagnosis, looking at it as an individual and their ability. Because I think right now society, in a way, even me, has this curse of, we see when something happens, we see that it's good or bad, right? Or we see that a light bulb is out, we go and change the light bulb. Whereas Darren or somebody with autism may say, why does it have to be a light bulb? Why can't, is that good or bad? Because this happened, this goodness happened it, but this is what we learned. So really looking outside of this preview of life, he's taught us that, which has been so just, it's been really a blessing. When I was in college, he had a therapist, an ABA therapist, that would come over, and I was really interested in what she was doing, and she invited me to go to a screening of a young autistic writer, and he wrote a movie called Normal People Scare Me, and it was fascinating. He was well aware that he had autism, well aware, but when he would go into a store and see people waiting in line, that scared him. Why weren't they juggling their bag of chips, or doing something interesting? Just waiting in line scared him. And through that, you start to look at your life and you're like, I could see how this can be scary for somebody like that, that looks at life a lot differently. So with that, we had to be very different with, I would say different with Darren. We had to adapt to Darren. And as well as he had to adapt to us, and me and my brother, both, and my mother, we all look after him, and my whole family actually all look after him in a way. So it's he's 16 now, so 16, 17, he's around there. So anyways, watching him grow up has been probably one of the best joys.
It's incredible that you're talking about all of the things that your brother is showing you and teaching you and making you think outside the box and giving you a whole different perspective. And I feel like that's a lot of what the world is going through. It's the growing pains of seeing the whole world in a different perspective, and seeing that there are so many different people that think differently and see things differently, and the world is trying to adjust, and it's not easy, and you just have to let that go and accept and see the world in their eyes as best you can.
Yep. Yep, because they're truly innovative in many ways, right? And they have to learn to communicate with us in their own way. So we're also being stretched in a sense of how do we communicate with them and still have this dialogue, you know? So and I guess the patience that we learn with that was through my grandmother, and because she's deaf. So we almost adapted that same sort of patience with Darren. So I remember saying that working at Buzz Lightyear, one of my first attractions, and we used to have, remember the big like Balzac balls? They were huge, and we would play with them at Greener. And I remember there was these kids. I was this blue Buzz Lightyear ball, just throwing it around with different kids. And there was this kid in a wheelchair, and he just looked like, put me in, coach, you know. And his mom didn't push him up, and I just kept looking at him. And so when I got the ball, I was like, well, I could throw it to him and it could totally hit him in the face, you know, or you know, he could continue looking at us, or he could catch it. I don't know. So I decided to throw it to him, and he didn't quite catch it, but I went over to him and he kind of held the ball and he kind of threw it back to me. And sure, it was different from the other kids, but that at that moment I realized he just wanted to be like a kid. And how special that was for him, right? And so adapting to that quickly, and knowing I had Darren at home, and knowing that I would hope someone would do the same thing for him, you know, influence that. And that happened, you know, in 2006. So that was well over 10 years ago. But that is a memory I will always hold from my early days at working at Disney.
Do you have any other stories of just guests or people that you've met that you feel like have really inspired your story or had a big impact on you?
When the housekeepers would come in, they sometimes would be like, you know, we'd be like, good morning and welcome. They'd be like, oh, another morning. And you go to the building, how are you doing? They're like, oh, don't talk to me right now. And I remember my leaders just like, oh, my peer, just like, they're talking to you like that, Ken? I'm like, it's okay. It's fine. It's a rough morning. But they realized this was a pattern. So I was like, well, let me talk to the housekeepers and the housemen. So I did. And they would tell me, well, Ken, you don't know what it's like, you know, trying to get here every morning. You know, like we have to take, some of us have to take buses or carpool and whatnot. So I took that to heart. I remember going back into my office and I'm like, what do I do about this? How do I understand this? So true story. I remember the next day parking my car in some neighborhood in Orlando and taking the bus in, and wearing a costume. And it was powerful because when the housekeeper slowly started getting on the bus and they saw me, they were shocked. And I just remember hearing so much more about their life, why they choose to come to Disney when they could work at a Marriott across the street somewhere else in Orlando. And I'm walking in and my general manager's like, did you just come in with them? And I was like, yeah, I rode the bus. And she said, that just gave you so much credibility. And I'm like, no, it gave them credibility, because now I know exactly what they mean. I know exactly what to do when they come in. They didn't give me anything. It gave them that much more credibility. And I just won't forget that trip coming on in with them and the conversations that I was having. It wasn't necessarily a struggle. It was just a long journey to get to work, and then to get back home. So having, again, walking a mile in their shoes, right? Having that, it just showed me a lot as a leader. I learned really quickly. In 1960s, it was the heightened of the civil rights movement. Disneyland had just been opened. When we think of what Disneyland did, the first time that people were able to be looked at as individuals and beyond the color of their skin was the first time they saw Sleeping Beauty's castle. The first time that they walked around and not have a cop follow them or them be judged was in Disneyland, right? And when we think of the racial injustice that went on, Disneyland almost was this place where anyone could go, you know? And to see that here we are today extending that in a way, and as Marty would say, reassuring, it's just powerful to be a part of. So the work could come, but it's so nice to know what we're working for.